At 1 o'clock. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our MBDA FPConnect webinar series. We're going to wait a few minutes. We'll start around 1 or 3. Give everybody a chance to log in. Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe uses the same code.
Oh, do they? Do they?
Yeah.
My husband's Army, so I.
That was Army guy too.
You Army?
Yeah. We got a white flag background.
Yeah. Not the same.
The best looking one
It's the Navy.
is the Navy.
He was-
Navy.
Navy. That's what I thought. He's Navy.
Yeah, right.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our MBDA FPConnect webinar series. My name is Kat Herrera, and I'm a part of the MBDA Federal Procurement Senate team. I want to introduce Tommy Marks, who is the former director of the Army Small Business Programs Office for the Secretary of the Army. Prior to serving as a civil servant, Marks served 24 years in the Army, retiring as a lieutenant colonel. In that position, he was the Army's lead for small business policy, goals, and procedures, and represented the Secretary of the Army at Congressional Committee and Subcommittee hearings, and responded to inquiries on small business, HBCUs, economic utilization, and other business matters. Currently, Mr. Marks serves as a director of the MBDA Federal Procurement Center that is responsible for helping minority business enterprises gain access to federal contracting opportunities, capital, key contacts, and market intelligence to successfully compete to win federal contracts.
Good afternoon. This is Tommy Marks, and I want to welcome you back again to WFPC, the Federal Procurement Center's webinar series. Now from the Director's Corner. A couple of keynotes from the SBA that came out just before the holidays. One key one is the SBA clarified its subcontracting rules, which went final rule on December 30th, essentially to put more enforcement and compliance of subcontracting plans. And hopefully what we get is with that enforcement that small businesses will get more dollars out of that. You can find that on the SBA's website at www.sba.gov. A second thing that came out that of interest is the annual review for the method for calculating annual revenue, for small businesses and to determine size. That final rule was effective January the 6th, and you can find the details of that at sba.gov /on size. And the third key thing that came out was the extension of the period for consolidation of mental protege programs that they're looking at taking the 8A program and the all small program and combining those. They actually gave it 21 days ago. They moved that date to 7 February. So if you were interested in providing comments, that window is still open. And you can go to www.regulations.gov to provide your comments. So I want to welcome, we have three outstanding, distinguished professionals here today with us that's going to talk to us about succession planning and how to diversify your portfolio through that. We have Ms. Erin Andrews, the Managing Director at Live Oak Bank's Government Contracting Division. We have Mr. Angel Diaz, Navy veteran and the CEO of ADS Federal Systems. And Mr. Lloyd Former, who I passionately keep calling Larry, the Senior Vice President of Client Delivery Services for Starry Associates. So today we'll begin with Ms. Andrews, and she will impart some words of wisdom on us.
Great, thank you so much. Is everything working on the, okay, wonderful. Well, I'm excited to be here and really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm so grateful for what MBDA does for small businesses. And I want to give a bit of an overview. I know my co-presenters, Lloyd and Angel, will kind of dig in a little bit more into their experience and just details, but I wanted to first give you just an overview of what we do at the bank and then kind of the strategy we take with small businesses as they're starting, growing, and then thinking about exit, because that exit is so critical. And I used to work at the Small Business Administration. Regardless of the industry small businesses in, the biggest mistake they generally make is not planning an exit soon enough. And I think in the GovCon space especially, when there are NAICS codes to think about, size standards, vehicle transfers, really thinking early on about what you want out of your business and then how to plan accordingly, the plan in place to see the exit that you want to see down the road, whether that's in 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years, or even beyond. So I think this is great that you all are doing this webinar and really appreciate the opportunity. Just as background on the bank, we're an FDIC regulated bank, #1 SBA lender, publicly traded. We work in 27 different industries. Government contracting is one of those industries, and we really have a focus area of supporting businesses as they buy, build, and sell. And I just wanted to give a little background on some of our team members who have government contracting experience. We have former contracting officers, folks that have worked in the private sector. And we really see, especially in the GovCon space, when you look at M&A, you really have to understand the rules and regulations and how things transfer. And like I mentioned, size and other things that really come into play when you're looking to exit. So it's important to have expertise, regardless of you know, who you're working with. And I don't think the slide is not, oh, sorry. And just as we're going on to the next slide, I always say, and I joke, you know, if you had a heart issue, would you go to your general practitioner? Probably not. Generally, you'd probably go to a heart surgeon or a heart specialist. And I think the same goes as you're looking for your exit. You're looking for folks to support you, mentors. You want folks that have gone through it, lawyers, accountants, whatever, you know, the support that you're looking for. Definitely having someone that has been there and done that. I wanted to quickly go over kind of the should I buy, should I build, or should I sell? Because I think they're very critical points in any, you know, growth trajectory of a business. And oftentimes in the GovCon space, when you're looking to sell, you have to think about, you know, if you have 5-year options, when you might sell now, or it might be the next best option to sell is 5 years from now. So it's really important to understand the levers you can pull and how you can buy, build, and sell to get to that end exit goal. So I'll quickly go over kind of the buying and building and then end with the selling and then pass it over to my co-presenters who will go into more detail kind of on their experience and recommendations as you exit. Number one thing to take away is past performance is king in the federal government. So 73% of contracts generally go to the incumbent. So a lot of folks contemplate inorganic growth versus organic growth to get to where they want to go quicker, to get into an agency, to transition to a new NAICS code. So really understanding the past performance, or sometimes moving from subcontract work to prime contract work. So for a lot of folks who might want to exit in 10 years from their GovCon business and they realize that the organic growth that would be involved could take 15 or 20 years, they look to buy to get to that exit a little bit faster. So something to contemplate as you're looking at kind of that long-term exit strategy that you're thinking about. And what an acquisition can do, it can give you, like I mentioned, the access to new agencies. It can decrease the amount of money and time you spend on business development to acquire a strong team, and it's access to ongoing and existing revenues. And a lot of folks use that acquisition. You know, there are critical points in a business where you might not have the infrastructure at a couple of million, but you'd have the infrastructure at 10 or 15 million. And so acquiring to get there can give you the infrastructure that will also give you a boost in your organic growth as well. So it's just something to contemplate. And it also helps diversify the portfolio. And like with anything in life, diversification is really important. It also is that way when you look at your federal agencies where you're doing work. We've looked just at the data, and based on any number of years, you're seeing a bump in revenues and obligated dollars to a particular company who has more access to more agencies. So oftentimes an acquisition can help with that additional access. And then a question we get a lot too is how to finance it, and learning how to leverage debt in a way that allows you to actually create more profits for that business to reinvest in the business is really important. So looking at things at the SBA 7A loan product, that's something we do a lot of, where it's 10-year terms, no prepayment penalties. It's, you know, anywhere from 5 to 15% cash down versus 25% cash down. Understanding how to leverage debt on the acquisition side is also really important. And then second, I wanted to just talk a little bit about, should I grow organically? Because you have inorganic and then you have organic as you're preparing for that exit. On the organic side, you know, looking at, you know, whether you want to delegate services to win contracts, invest in your business development. And I'm sure Lloyd and Angel have, you know, I know they both have a lot of experience with this and kind of can talk through some of the investments you should make as you're contemplating an exit. Also thinking about mentor protege programs. You could be sizing out of a NAICS code or graduating out of the 8A program. Learning how to capture and continue some of that revenue is really critical. And so finding teaming partners, leveraging things like the All Small Mentor Protege program or the DoD Men Protégé program are really important and can add a lot to your bottom line as you're kind of moving into the full and open, transitioning NAICS codes or whatnot. And then understanding how to leverage debt as well. I mentioned this earlier on the acquisition, but identifying, cheaper debt that would allow you to, if you're investing in growth, you might use debt to pay, to help with, payroll, but oftentimes that debt can be better utilized, for an acquisition. So thinking about what your cash flow looks like and how to, use different tools that are there to help with that potential growth from an organic perspective. So finally, what we're here to talk about is, should I sell as an exit? There are a lot of different ways to exit, and I hear this, a lot of folks will mention private equity in the small business space. There are a lot of affiliation rules. There are things to think about. Sometimes a small business, and oftentimes having a small business sell to another small business is a very great, clean, and good way to exit, because you don't run into some of the affiliation challenges. And also, if you have small business set-asides, you have SDVOSB set-asides, 8A set-asides, women-owned, you need to sell to someone that is able to kind of take over those set-asides. And it's important to look at the contracts. If you're an SDVOSB small business owner and you have no SDVOSB set-aside contracts, you can sell to any small, but mostly small business set-aside, you can sell to any small business. If you have full and open contracts, you can sell to pretty much anyone. So understanding who you can sell to is important. I get that question a lot. I'm a WOSB, do I have to sell to another WOSB? No, unless the contracts they have are WOSB set-aside contracts. So really understanding the contracts, and you can do a look at FPDS. You can work with folks to identify what contracts, you looking at your backlog and looking at, who could potentially buy you. So that's really important to think about, should I sell? So the questions that I get a lot, when should I sell and when is a good time? And I would say, there are a couple of factors that are involved. Determining your timing for an exit and a price range you would be happy with. If you don't have a wealth planner already, you should have one, and you should identify how much money you need to retire. You should also talk to your accountant about the tax implications, because there are significant tax implications when you sell that will impact your purchase price. And so you might have a number in mind, but then, we get folks that then realize there's, 27% tax implication, and the number ends up being way lower than they had anticipated, and the retirement isn't quite what they thought when they exit. So it's really important to take those steps. And like I mentioned before, if you had a heart issue, you'd go to a heart surgeon. If you're looking to exit, go to someone who knows the space, understands the size standards, challenges, tax implications, and has done it before. And then another thing is, talk to a sell-side advisory or an advisor and an attorney who has done this as well. And so when is the best time to sell? I mentioned earlier, and we see this a lot, they're usually different points in time, and we see kind of 5-year increments. And I think a lot of that has to do with large recompetes that folks have. You might have 5 years left on a contract, and your company's going to be worth more with more backlog on it. So you're going to be worth a lot more selling your company with 5 years of runway versus 1 or 2 years. So we usually look like right after you win, and it might, you might have a couple of wins that are the majority of your revenues. That's probably the best time to contemplate it. It's also the hardest time, I think, emotionally for someone to sell, because you see the opportunity of that win you just had. But when you look at the numbers, generally speaking, that's usually the best time. And then when more people can buy your company is usually the best time to sell. So there are some challenges, and I'm happy to answer questions around the 8A program. 8A assets are more difficult to transfer. There is a waiver requirement for those. So if you're an 8A company that has a lot of 8A set-asides, it can take a little longer. And there's a waiver that the administrator of the SBA has to sign off on to allow for that type of transaction. SDVOSBs, women-owned small businesses, the assets don't transfer in the same way, so it's a little easier. In small businesses, it's the same thing. If you do an asset versus a stock sale, so something else to keep in mind, an asset sale does require novations. A stock sale does not. But if you do an asset sale, you don't have to recertify as small as well. So sometimes if folks are close to their NAICS codes, those are just things to contemplate. And the more buyers you have, the higher multiple, and I'll talk about multiples in a second, you'll be able to get, because if you have, only 8A contracts and SDVOSB contracts and women-owned small business contracts, while it's amazing, and those are great contracts to have, you're going to have to find someone who could buy. So you're going to have to find an SDVOSB 8A women-owned small business that could buy you. So the pool of buyers could be smaller, which could potentially drive down that multiple. But usually it's in the eyes of the beholder, and the marketplace really determines the price. The challenge for small businesses, and I will say this when we get into the multiple conversation, is that usually small businesses have to leverage debt. So I'll just save that when we get to the multiples. First, I want to kind of talk a little bit about how you value a small business. Really quickly, we look at EBITDA, so earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation and amortization. It's not like Silicon Valley where you're going to get 30 times multiples on your revenue. You really should talk about a multiple on your EBITDA. So you could be an $80 million company with really small margins and sell for less than a $30 million company with larger margins. So it's just something to contemplate as you're getting close to selling. How do you maximize the margins that you have? Because that's really going to hit the bottom line, and that's going to touch on that sale price. So EBITDA is the way we determine that price, and they're usually add backs, and add backs can include things like, officer comp. So if you're selling your company and another CEO is buying, oh, and here's the EBITDA slide. Sorry about that. And this is this is how to, look at EBITDA. And a lot of you, do this anyway, but I usually can, look at the margins. I can take an average margin on a company, and you can kind of ballpark what you might be worth today. Obviously, you're going to look at how much room you have in your NAICS code. So if you're in a 541-611 NAICS code with 16.5 million is the max, and you're at 15 million, it's going to be really difficult for someone, to buy you. Someone with less than $1.5 million in revenues can buy you. It's the combined revenue. So it's just something to keep in mind. Let me just talk a little bit quickly about the multiples. This is generally what we see in the small business space and the full and open space. And so I mentioned earlier, it's not like a Silicon Valley tech company where you're going to be chasing down, 100 times or 50 times or 50, whatever it might be. You got to be a little realistic, because especially if you have small business set aside, a similarly situated small business has to buy you. And if they have to buy you, they're generally going to be borrowing money, and a bank needs to finance that. And the bank has to look at a debt service coverage ratio. So for every dollar of debt, there's a certain amount of free and open cash a buyer needs to have. Usually for SBA standard, it's 1 to 1.15. That's the debt service coverage ratio. A lot of banks are anywhere from there to 1.5, depending on the type of deal. So it really keeps the multiples a little lower. And we see multiples in the small business space being anywhere from that 2 to 5 times multiple. And these are just some things we've seen on deals, lower end, smaller margin 8A work, not as much cleared, 1 capability or 2, a lot of subcontract work, could be that 2 to 3 times multiple. You get higher in that small business space if you have cleared work, you have best in class vehicles, you have a strong pipeline with 5 years left on contracts, high margins, more capabilities. And then when you get into the full and open space, you don't, a large prime contractor has a lot of money to buy a business. So they're not caught in that debt service coverage ratio all the time. So they're able to drive multiples a lot higher. And folks with products, folks with work in the Intel space, full and open work can be bought by pretty much anyone. And that drives that 6+ multiple. So with that, I think that just kind of concludes, and I'm happy to answer any questions, whether it be on add backs, multiples, how to calculate it, or anything else that might be helpful. But definitely start planning early. That's the lesson learned, I think, for everyone.
Okay, so we're going to questions. And the first question we have, yes, for slide decks, and all the slide decks will be available when it's over. We'll hang them on our website and folks will be able to go and get them. Any other questions coming in? So Ms. Andrews did so well that there are no questions coming in at this time. So what we're going to do is we're going to transition to Mr. Diaz, and he will provide his information.
Mr. Marks, Ms. Barrow, thank you for having me. Erin, pleasure as always. You guys have my my bio on there, right? So I won't waste too much time covering that, other than I am an M&A veteran. I'm CEO of ADS Federal, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about my experience with an acquisition and a merger. And Live Oak was the bank that I worked with to accomplish that. Sure, my slides are matching up with what I'm saying here. Okay. So before we begin, I do have a framework that I put together. And basically, these are the things that I looked at during the acquisition process. Now, it's not a one size fits all. It's different for everyone, right? This framework here is not meant to be all inclusive, but it does give you some high level areas to consider when you're looking to acquire. Now, you know, why would you want to acquire? And I think Erin covered perhaps why. Most folks, at least in my experience, it was scaling, right? You know, I had a business, a technical service corporation, ran it for about 8 years. We fluctuated between 5 and 7 million, but the reality was I'm on site billable 100% of the time. And my partner, which is my wife, Marisol, she ran the back office, right? So while I was billing on site, bringing in revenue for the company, Marisol was running HR and finance and everything else. And then outside of working hours, I was developing businesses, writing proposals, hiring, you know, that kind of thing. So there's only so much you can do. There's only 24 hours in a day. I think we're getting to about 20 hours of work. So at one point I said, you know, what can I do to scale, right? And then I met a couple friends and I was introduced to Live Oak, and they explained to me some of the options that I had. Now, easier said than done, right? You know, buying a company is a big deal. And until you're going through the process, there is no way to even know or conceptualize around what is required and what you're gonna have to put yourself through to do that, right? So what I did, I put this framework together. I reflect on my experience all the time. And you know, I put this small framework together. So let's go ahead and take a look at it, right? So who's merging into who, right? So the reality is, if you're the owner, if you built a company, right, you have some sense of ownership over that company, you probably want to bring some of that into the combined entity. Now, this is assuming you merge. I know some companies do a subsidiary. In my case, we merged. And the rationale for that was, you know, bringing a company together, defining an organizational culture that's cohesive was important to me, right? So we merged, right? It was Technical Services Corporation. There was a company called Accelerated Development and Support. We merged and changed the name to ADS Federal. So mechanically, the way we did that, you got to think through all this, right? Because you have contracts that are active, right? Revenue coming in, bills getting paid, all that kind of thing. So TSC, who was the 8A certified SDVOSB company, we definitely wanted to keep them, right? Keep their DUNS and cage code and all that. We also have facility clearance associated with that. So we definitely wanted to keep the smaller company in this case, but the one that had a fair amount of infrastructure, right? So we ended up doing a name change, right? It's a straightforward, relatively simple process, much different than Innovation, right? So we changed the name of the company to ADS Federal as an owner, right? You have some kind of ownership, it's an emotional aspect to this. You know, it's something I had to think about. And at the end of the day, when you're doing this, you always got to put the company and employees first. if you're looking to grow and build something truly amazing, right? So we changed the name, right? The other thing was the culture, right? One entity had a culture, the other entity had a different culture, but what was going to be born as a result of that merging, right? So you got to think about that. What do you want the end result to be, right? What do you envision? You got to define that, and you got to bring in on your execs and kind of have them, drink from the Kool-Aid, if you will, right? We all got to be on the same page if you want to influence others to kind of follow along, right? Those are big things. And then the question you have to ask yourself, can I run this company? The reality is, if you haven't had a journey running a company, if you can't run all aspects of your company, then hold on, right? Give yourself time to have a journey and learn what it takes to run a business, because nobody's going to care more about this business than you. And if you don't fully understand it, you're going to be in for a big surprise, right? So know how to run a company, because when you hire folks to do the work, you want to make sure that they're doing the right thing, or you don't want to overpay for things that it's very expensive to do an acquisition, right? And there's folks coming out from all sides, with lawyers and accountants and everybody trying to take their piece. And if you can't stand back and look at it and be like, this is not the way I want this, you got a narrow scope of this next thing, you're going to be paying a lot of money for an acquisition. And I think that's an area, you want to be set up for success. Overpaying for an acquisition is not how you want to start, right? So keep that in mind. The next part of the framework here is combined business size. Now, I know we've had some recent changes, right, to the 5-year standards and NAICS codes and all that. In my case, right, I wanted a NAICS code that I can grow in. 16 mil wasn't the right answer for me, right? So for me, I wanted a company with an engineering NAICS code. At the time, it was 38.5 million. I think now it's about 40 million or so. So that gives me a lot of space to grow in, right? And again, when you're thinking about exiting, right, you want to leave a little space in there so whoever's buying you can grow it further, right? That's part of the incentive of buying a company like ours, for example. Further refine it, hone it in, increase its profits, and then grow it a little bit, right? So space within the next, size standard was important to me. Got to keep in mind your pipeline, right? So now the combined revenue of the entity could impact your pipeline, right? So you have to have a pipeline, which is basically, the work that you're going after. Some are recompetes, right? You can't lose sight of your recompetes. That's very important. In my case, we had 5 concurrent recompetes upon acquisition. So think about that. Something I wish I would have known. I would have conceptualized around earlier, right? So now you're coming into a new organization. You're changing everything, or a lot of it, right? You're challenged with bringing a company together, increasing profits, lowering operating costs, that kind of thing. And then you have 5 recompetes coming up, some of which you have no idea about because you weren't the original artist behind the proposal, right? So, there's no excuse. You have to close the deal. You got to bring those recompetes in. Now you're buying a company that a year later you have significantly less revenue, right? So you got to be careful with that. So take a look at how much backlog, as Erin mentioned, is left in those contracts. Give yourself enough time to understand the business, the combined business, build those relationships with the employees, the executives, the clients. If you don't have those 3, if you don't have relationships established from those 3 perspectives, good luck, right? So spend a lot of time building relationships, right? Getting buy-in from your employees as to who they are as a result of the merger and the new corporate identity. Quickly here, contract vehicles. Obviously, vehicles are great. Many folks buy companies because you can't get into the contract vehicle, right? Because it's limited in time. But when you can submit a proposal, so many folks buy a company that already have the contract vehicle, and that's a great way to get access to work that you wouldn't otherwise have access to, right? The biggest thing for me that I did not know, right? So I was used to T&M and FFP contracts. The CPFF world is completely different. It's completely different. And as a matter of fact, you got to be very careful because, for example, an owner, the year that they're selling, right, may increase the operating costs to increase the margin in the CPFF contract. Therefore, your revenue is going to be higher and your profit's going to be more because the fee is a percentage of the total revenue. Now, if you're the year you're recompeting, your wrap rate's too high, good luck. So now you have to figure out a way to lower your wrap rate, right? Which is going to impact the revenue of your company and therefore your profits. right? But you have to lower your rep rate because you won't be competitive to go after the same work. So that was something that I had no, no experience in. Now I do.
Yeah.
And you know, you got to be very creative, right? You got to be very risk adverse, right? It's interesting because we work with banks, for example, right? And lawyers, extremely risk adverse, right? And they're kind of the balancing factor. But on the entrepreneurial side and the business side, you can't be adverse to risk. If not, you're going to lose every single time, right? It's highly competitive, and you got to be smart about things, how you go after things. And the CPFF world, I think there's some strategy that you learn how to manipulate the rates to a way that makes you competitive, but yet you won't go bankrupt, right? And a lot of the CPFF work is low margin, right? So you're not really building to. That's the kind of work you develop to build your infrastructure, not necessarily the kind of work that you develop to be profitable. Most of that work is not very profitable, but it builds your infrastructure. So you got to reinvest that money to build your BD team, build your operations from a service delivery perspective, back office, HR, finance, all those kinds of things, to then build the infrastructure necessary to scale to win the work that's more profitable, right? So keep that in mind. CPFF is a whole new world. The accounting systems alone needed to manage this kind of work. The costs associated with, for example, cost point or having resources, full-time resources to, deal with all the audits, right? So imagine you got 8A audits, SDV, OSB audits, DCAA audits, you got bank audits. You basically need a person full-time just to deal with the flow of audits. It's incredible. The amount of money that it takes just to manage a CPFF system and all supporting resources is incredible. That was new to me, and if anybody has questions about that, I'd be glad to dive into great detail about that. The costs, let me tell you something, this stuff's expensive, right? If you let it, lawyers will come out of the woodworks and charge you $300,000 for an acquisition, right? There's so much money going from left to right. All they're doing is just pulling, just grabbing it from the sky, right? You have to know exactly who you're dealing with. You got to limit the scope. In my case, and Erin can attest, I took over the entire deal. From an M&A perspective, from a legal perspective, from an audit perspective, I took over the entire thing and worked with them and their subject matter experts to control the chaos associated with acquisition. It's an incredible effort, right? I mean, someone could just stand back and kind of let it happen. You can do that. I know folks that have done it, but the costs associated with that mistake, in some cases, are too much to overcome. Just think about it, right? If you're acquiring a company and you immediately have $500,000 in debt, and your margins are 5 to 8%, which is industry average, how long is it going to take for you to pay that off, right? So the more the owner is involved in the process, the better relationship they have with the bank, right? And again, you have to learn. It's a journey, right? You have to be a smart entrepreneur. You have to know operations, BD, finance, HR, recruiting, right? Understand the legal aspects and legal ramifications. And from a legal perspective, there's financial, there's taxes, right? There's contract law, there's human resources. There's so many legal aspects to this that you have to be on your game, right? Luckily, Live Oak has a great team that helps you along the way, especially around contracts, right? Novations take a long time, and not everything novates, right? And if luckily, I was looking for a company that had small business contracts, not necessarily set-aside contracts, right? But some were set-aside. Guess what happened to those set-aside 8A contracts? They got taken away. So basically, you're coming into a deal, you're closing, and you're losing work, right? Because they don't all novate, right? And navigating the contractual implications of an acquisition and a merger, especially around things such as 8A or any other kind of set-aside, it's not just going to happen on its own, right? It's a very complex process. We're not in control all the time. The government is really in control of this. And, they may not even do it. And if they do it, it's going to take a long time. I mean, we're still waiting on contracts to novate. So think about that. We have contracts that haven't novated yet on vehicles we're going after. But we're going after contracts, we're using a different name. So being able to verbalize that, explain that to your team, to the clients, to the contracting office, you have to be able to do that. If not, one thing goes sideways, you could lose a $30 million deal, right? Yes, sure, thank you. So, very complex process, right? In my case, I needed it for scaling, and I found the right team, and I was able to hire the right team afterwards, right, to help us not skip a beat. We didn't skip a beat. We had, in our case, we had the acquisition, the merger, the recompetes, ISO certifications, recertification of the DC accounting system, so many different things. And my team and I, we were able to successfully execute on all that. But it takes a plan. It takes strong leadership, right? Things don't just happen on their own. And, having a bank, I can't tell you, to be honest, Live Oak's here, but if they weren't here, I'll say it anyways. Many nights, right? There's a few folks in the bank that I talk to on a regular basis. So a lot of things that occur that we as business owners don't necessarily know how to navigate. And the folks in your company don't know either, right? They're looking to you for answers as a leader of the organization. So having a group of folks that can educate you and help strategize around, all sorts of different topics, right? Not just the loan, right? And things like that, but contracts, legal. We just had a situation recently around the potential protest, right? And I was able to consult with Live Oak, and they were experts, and they gave me exceptional advice, right? And the reality is, because we have a relationship, that didn't cost me anything. If I were to go to an attorney for this, at least $500 an hour, and the reality is they're not going to give you anything you can actually use, because it's so general in nature that to protest something, you got to have your ducks in a row. Things got to be documented a certain way. For a small business, $20,000, $30,000 cost for a potential protest, which you're probably going to lose anyways. That's a lot, right? So, if I were to say, build a strong team, you don't need a lot of folks, just a few good folks. Having a good lending partner that does more than lending is probably one of the most important things. From a CPFF perspective, right? You give me an example. They do fee holdback, right? So now if you have a small margin, it's even smaller because we're holding back 10% of the fee. Now, if you have 10 contracts and you're waiting on multiple years to get that fee, you have an accounts receivable, $500,000 just sitting there, money you can't even touch. So you need a way to tap your credit lines until that money comes in. Having a bank that's flexible, they can say, here you go, get it done. Let me tell you, there's nothing more relieving to a business owner than making payroll on time and being able to pay your bills, right? Because the minute you don't pay your employees, the minute you don't pay your partners, you're going to start having issues, because the organization will begin to fragment, right? And that is my primary focus in the company, keeping the company together, right? And doing whatever happens, the employees never find out, right? I remortgaged my house. It's happened before, right? Equity loans, take the money out of my 401k. That is the pain that we as business owners must endure to hopefully get to the end goal, which is, in my case, in the case of many owners, is to build something beautiful and then exit, right? It really is. You're living a few years of your life like nobody would. You can live the rest of your life like nobody could. And I really believe that. And by a few years, I mean at least 10 or 15 years, right? It's sort of like 40 years, right? So it's still 10 or 15 years. There's no shortcut, right? It's not an easy game. You're gonna get hit more than you win, right? We get hit 9 times out of 10. We get back up. We keep on doing it, right? You learn something along the way. So it's very strenuous. A lot of anxiety most of the time, but you're learning something. You're building something beautiful, and with the idea that at some point those that were part of that, right? So me, my executives, our partners are going to be able to realize some kind of value that's greater than, what we came into the deal with, right? So, it's exciting. It's dangerous, right? Because you don't know what lies ahead. It's a lot of risk involved. But anybody with the appetite, anybody who has already been cut and kind of knows what it feels like to feel pain, right? Anybody who's endured that pain and built a tolerance for pain, I would say this could be the next logical step. If you're looking to scale and do big things and build a beautiful company, more beautiful or bigger than what you currently have, I would say it's worth a shot. But it's very difficult. It's not easy. A lot of competitors. You compete against guys like me, so good luck. So yeah, have a great team, know what you're getting into. At best, you may know 75% of what it takes. There's a lot of things that are coming your way you have no clue about. So make sure you have a good team backing you that can support you when needed. And that's all I have. I can talk all day, But if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. My email address is somewhere around here. Shoot me an email. I'll be glad to respond via email. Or come by the office. We'll sit down and go through the details. I'm pretty open to this, and I want to see folks succeed.
We do have 2 questions for you.
Sure.
All right.
First question.
Please explain that. So Erin mentioned
email. Basically, your profits after all sorts of taxes and things like that, right? Now, as a business owner, for example, right, I may have a late lease car, right? That's part of my current, all that's calculated in your profits and all that, right? But if a person were to buy my company, I can add back the cost of that lease on the car because that's my car, it's not theirs, right? These are all the things you can add back. Now, if I spend $100,000 on a company Christmas party, that's way out there, right? Chances are that some of that could be added back, right? Our distribution networks?
Okay,
Usually can be if they're gonna continue the business, it just depends on,
And so the business owner, right, you may pay yourself W-2 income, right? And then you may pay yourself on a K-1, a distribution at the end of the year. Some of those distributions are add backs to the company, so they go back on the books from an acquisition perspective. Somebody's trying to buy you. So, you got to be very smart about your add backs when you're looking to exit, but always kind of think about that along the way, right? Because when you do exit, you want it to be as much as streamlined as possible, knowing it is going to be somewhat chaotic. So keep your books clean, trying to add things on there that you don't have to add, because this is going to be more work for you later on. You got to clean everything up, right? So that's what an add back is. These are numbers. This is the amount of money that's being added back to your EBITDA, which is then calculated times the multiplier to determine the value of your company. You can see, looking at two companies that are in red and both are propping up their numbers with add backs.
the add back pollution.
Well, what was that, Karen?
Add back pollution. Sometimes we call it add back.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you have your own consultants, right? They're going to have their accountants, you have yours, right? And the reality is, in order to close one of these deals, both sides get in a room, you kind of go back and forth and figure out what the best kind of the middle ground is, right? I may go add back crazy. Of course I am. I'm trying to sell a company with as much money as possible, but then you on your side need an accountant, a forensic accountant, and I had a great one, by the way, who can read through some of that nonsense and say, you know what, that's not really an add back. Sure. So having good accountants is key. And I'll give you an example. We were looking at an initial company that had excellent numbers, almost too good to be true. And they were in fact too good to be true, right? Luckily, we had a forensic accountant that went through the whole deal, liable went through the whole deal, and found some areas of discrepancy, which the delta was probably $4 or $5 million in the value of the company. So imagine buying a company for $4 or $5 million more than it's worth, right? Yeah, you pay $40,000 to the accountant to do the work, but it's going to save you $5 million, right? So you have to, got to balance it out. You got to pay to play. Nothing's free. Just make sure you pay the right people. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one more. What's the cause of delays?
Cause of delay innovations. Okay, well, you can look at this from two perspectives, right? So obviously there's a fair amount of due diligence that you have to do once you acquire, right? And work with your attorney to figure out the contracts, put all the innovation documentation in place, submit that to the government. Once it goes into the government, who knows, right? It takes a long time. It's a process on their end, and they're backed up too, right? So you're looking anywhere between, a year to 2 years to do a contract innovation. In our case, we're about 14 months in, and we received indication that it's going to be completed soon, but innovations still haven't been done, right? That's not going to stop you from pursuing anything. It just adds an extra level of complexity to your framework. That's all, right? It just adds another layer of complexity. It's still not going to stop you from going after work or anything like that. But just keep that in mind, right? It's just an additional element that you must account for.
Last.
Thank you. Did Live Oak assist with the due diligence of the acquisition? Most certainly they did, and they're still assisting. So you have to have a great relationship with the Live Oak team, right? And they have different experts in different areas, right? So everything from the initial valuation of the company, right, kind of figuring out what that is and how to construct well, not just figuring out what the company is worth, but putting a structure in place to acquire it. Now, I kind of had that on my notes, so I'm glad to remind you, right? So, you have to understand, right? SBA has great programs for loans up to $5 million. When you exceed $5 million, you're getting investor money, which is very expensive, right? So you got to really think about, is it really a better company to buy? Well, it depends, right? If you're, 90% of what you're making has to go to the investor, then it may not be, right? Try to do this as cheaply as possible. Or in my case, I used an SBA loan that was backed. but no investor cash, right? So you gotta figure out how you wanna structure the deal. Typically, it's a combination of bank money, some money up front from you, a note to the owner, right? So you wanna have a note, which also serves as a sense of security as a clawback, right? So in case the owner says something that wasn't true, you can deduct the amount of money or no. But you know what that may be, and then in some cases you have investment money, which it's expensive, right? So other hands in the mix, right? Personally, I like to be able to make decisions as you fit, and sometimes we have investors who can't do that. So just consider all those elements before you get into an acquisition.
Okay, Angel, appreciate it. So as we transition to Mr. Lloyd Former, Mr. Diaz's email, as he eloquently told you that you can get a hold of him, is angel.diaz@adsfederal.com. And we had a general question, which was, we will receive the voice presentation along with the PowerPoint. This is being recorded, and both the PowerPoint and the voice will be accessible on www.mbdafpc.com. There is no video. Erin would not allow us to do that today. No, there is no video, but you can email her at Erin, ERIN.Andrew@Live Oak Bank. And yes, her slides, all three presented slides will be available on the website not later than tomorrow when this is over. And now we have Mr. Lloyd Former from Starry Associates.
Thank you so much. Great presentations. As I was listening to those presentations, I was like, I wish those presentations had been available to me when I was thinking about making my acquisition, because as Angel said so eloquently, it is a very complex process. A lot of individuals involved, a lot of stuff as an entrepreneur you don't know. So it's a lot of learning on the fly. So it was a very exciting process as well. So let me tell you a little bit about my organization. Am I hitting the right one here? Doesn't seem to be. Oh. Okay. Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about my organization. I'm a senior vice president for Starry Associates. Starry Associates is like most small companies. We've been in business for about 37 years. I had been with them for 3. We provided a wide variety of client services. As you can see on our slide, we do HHS, commerce, we do some commercial consultings, federal financial management, IT services. So we had a very viable business. We were looking for ways to kind of supercharge and grow our business. So how do we do that? So as discussed during the earlier presentations, you can either do organic growth or you can do inorganic growth. And as Erin stated in her presentation, there's a timing issue, there's a probability of issues with the situation where it's, as she said, 73% of the incumbents win their work. So it's very hard to grow organically if you want to grow at a quick period of time. So, but when you talk about the inorganic growth acquisition, as Angel mentioned, you get into cost, you get into expertise, you get into risk. We decided after careful deliberation to go into implement solution 2, which meant organic growth, which meant purchasing a company. And I'm basically outlining my journey. And I'm talking about what I've identified here is kind of the 7 steps that I had to implement in order to have a successful M&A transaction. So the first thing I had to do is develop an acquisition strategy, and I'll talk about all these things in detail. Selection of M&A service providers, identification of acquisition targets, and final selection, due diligence, financing, closing, and transition activities. So the first thing we're talking about, and both Erin and Angel kind of alluded to this, is determining what you want to buy, why you want to buy it. Some of the things that they were discussed in terms of, do you want to buy set-asides? Are you looking to get into a different organization? Are you looking to acquire technology? Are you looking to acquire different clients? Are you looking to acquire or you want to get in the intel space? These are all the reasons why you need to determine why you're developing your acquisition strategy. First, you need to be able to explain it to yourself, and you need to have buy-in within your organization. Secondly, as you talk to people within the industry, banks, other lawyers, attorneys, people that are going to help you possibly identify targets, they need to have an understanding about what you're doing and why you're doing it. So those are some of the things that I suggest in terms of looking for when you're developing your acquisition strategy. Again, we talked about contracts, whether you want cost plus fixed fee, all the different kind of things you're looking for when you're buying a contracting company. Also, as Angel mentioned, what kind of price do you want to pay? How much revenue do you want to? How much money do you want to spend for this particular transaction? Since for most small businesses, it's going to be financed for a bank, there are some kind of limitation. How much cash do you want to bring to the table? Those are all the kind of things that you have to think about when you're developing your acquisition strategy. In addition, you got to think about the deal structure, something that Angel mentioned as well. We talked about asset or stock purchase. Then we also talked about the affiliation issues. What level of guarantee do you as an owner do you want to take? If there's going to be an involvement with the bank, there's going to be some kind of guarantee. Do you, as an owner, what do you feel comfortable with in terms of level of guarantees? Also, then earnouts. He mentioned owners financing and loan and cash. Most owners, they don't really like earnouts. They would rather avoid owners. Everybody wants to take their money and go off and ride off into the sunset. However, earnouts provide you some level of security along with seller financing, as Angel mentioned. There's also what percentage of the deal do you want to be versus a loan versus cash. We were involved in a transaction at some point where we had put in a letter of intent, which I'll explain a little bit later. And the individual who bought that company, I think we offered like 60% cash, and they went and offered them like 80% cash. I mean, those are the kind of conversations or discussions you have to have within the organization. Do you feel comfortable like that? How do you want to structure the deal? So those are the kind of things you got to think about that is part of your acquisition strategy. The next thing is the selection of M&A service providers. That was a chore. I must have met with every attorney in town. I met with probably quite a few banks. I met with a lot of M&A advisors. I actually did comparison charts. That helped me because it got to be confusing. So I had comparison charts of all the M&A advisors I met, because each M&A advisor was providing a different level of service. They had a different fee structure. I became intimately familiar with the Lehman scale, which I had never heard of before that. All these different aspects of how they wanted to get success fees. The same things with the attorneys, even with dealing with the banks. Now we weren't working with Live Oak Bank. We ended up working with another bank. But so we interviewed probably like 5 or 6 different banks. There's a couple of reasons why you want to meet with these folks besides just to try to see who's going to support your team. First, you get a chance to see the different things that are out there, what are different people are offering, because people are offering you a wide variety of different things. In addition, since I was trying to identify targets on my own, each time I met with an M&A advisor, each time I met with the bank, each time I met with anybody involved in the industry, I gave them a clear understanding of what I was looking for. So now they could start bringing deals to me. And the deal that we actually ended up finding was from a relationship that I had from somebody I met during my looking for organizations to support me. So that's very important. There's also private equity as well that you can get involved with. I mean, I think that brings in a whole different situation to the transaction, but that's something you can consider as well in terms of if you want to get involved with private equity. And within the private equity space, there's all kinds of different organizations. There's some that want to use your company maybe as a springboard. There's some that even actually will buy a percentage of your company. So there's all kinds of different private equity venues and alternatives out there in the space. So what I did was I developed a pipeline of acquisition targets, of service providers, of everything. Now, when you're looking for companies, there are advertised ones and then there are non-advertised ones, meaning that, there may be a company that may want to be for sale, but they're not on the market yet. When they're on the market with an M&A advisor, the advantage of that is they're going to have a lot more stuff prepared for you. As you're making the acquisition, you're going to need information from the company. And when it's an M&A advisor involved, they're going to generally have all that stuff prepared. If you're going to the company and they don't have that, an M&A advisor, then they're not going to have that kind of stuff prepared. So you have to make a decision on whether you want to deal with those in the advertised space or those in the non-advertised space as well. And I think I already talked about letting entities know that you're looking for targets. Then we went through the process of quantifying our targets. We came up with a template, and we had several meetings within our management team to try to determine which companies most met our needs and what we were looking for moving forward. And then obviously, as they spoke about in more detail, I won't reiterate that, they talked about valuations, the multiples, EBITDA, all those different things associated with how you purchase a company. Now, as Erin said, most of the time, the owner thinks their business is worth more than one time what it actually is. So that's an ongoing struggle. You can have a lot of contracts, especially in the 8A space, but they may be profitable, but they're not as valuable to someone else who's trying to be an acquirer. So you have to kind of bridge that gap sometimes. Then there's a non-disclosure agreement, and finally a letter of intent. We issued out probably like 4 or 5 letter of intents before we actually found a company that we could finally close the deal with. Now, one of the things I was trying to do, I wasn't able to accomplish that, is have like multiple letter of intents out at the same time. But that's kind of hard to do because you really have to have a good deal pipeline of a lot of targets to be able to have identified for you to be able to do that. But that's something too, so that way you're just not stuck on one company. You got 4 or 5 companies that you're thinking about. You can rank them, and that also gives you a little bit more leverage as you're going through trying to make a final deal with somebody. Once you start the due diligence, it is a project. You know, as Angel said, there are a lot of people involved. You know, you have legal, you have vendor relationships, you have financial, you have human resources, you have contracts, you have clients. My suggestion to anybody is to treat due diligence like a project. We had schedules, we had teams, we had assignments, we had roles and responsibilities, we had checklists, we had meetings as we were going through this whole process. Accountants are involved, lawyers are involved. You have to review their HR policies to make sure they're consistent with yours. You have to look at their vendor relationships, their contracts, the entire organization, their leases. I mean, so you have to have a team of people, or if you're doing it on your own, which is probably not a good suggestion, you have to have a team of people that's going to be able to help you to be able to achieve your objectives, and you have to coordinate all these different activities. One more thing about due diligence. You also have to do diligence on their contracts and also find out who their key employees are. So, okay, I can get it. Then there's financing, which we won't spend too much time on because Erin's focused on a lot of time on that. And then the transaction costs. The transaction costs, as Angel mentioned, are expensive. So you really want to do a good job of trying to keep those under control. Closing, which is a moving date, and then there's a lot of paperwork associated with the closing, working with the owners, legal, accounting. Then there's the transfer of items, bank accounts, physical corporate structure, password, keys, and everything. Again, another project where you want to have checklists and schedules. Finally, talk a little bit about the transition. You want to create a detailed transition plan. We had meetings because you have to coordinate the announcements with the staff. You have to coordinate announcements with the teams. You have to integrate functions. You have to discuss how you're going to take over items like insurance, the lease. At the same time, you want to try to get buy-in from the staff and emphasize to the staff that it's not a takeover, but it's a merger of best practices, because you don't want to buy the company and then have everybody leave the next day. So in closing, if we look at the lessons learned, is a couple things: plans and checklists. You want to have plans, you want to have checklists. You want to have a strong CFO involved, because there's a lot of accounting and financing involved in this endeavor. So you want to have somebody who understands all those type of things. You want to have a list of deliverables so you can control how much money you're spending from a legal aspect. It's all about financing, finances, and finances. So you want to have somebody who has a really strong accounting background to understand the entire process. You need complete buy-in from your corporation so that everybody's on the same page. This will be a journey. It'll be ups and downs. A lot of issues come up because you're dealing with a lot of personalities. Owners have egos on both sides. Lawyers have egos. They're talking with the other lawyers. The bank has lawyers. Everybody has lawyers, and they're all talking. So you're involved in that whole process. You want to try to keep the cost under control, human factors as well, in terms of the fact that you're working with people. And remember, patience is a virtue because you want to make sure that you get the best deal. So.
Thanks, Lloyd. You've done so well. Also, I hadn't seen any questions come in, but we do have a question we're going to go back to Erin with. To talk to us, summarize 5 extra strategies for small business to consider.
Yes, no, absolutely. And to summarize, we were making sure you're all stayed for the entire webinar to get these 5 strategies. But I think this is incredible, a wealth of knowledge, and I just want to thank Lloyd and Angel. The hardest thing to do is to own and run a business, and even harder, I think, is to go through an acquisition. So thank you to both of you for everything that you do day in and day out to support our government and the small business community. There are a lot of different ways you can exit, and I think we've touched on some of these. You can do an acquisition where you exit entirely and someone new buys your company. You can do a partner buyout. So if you want someone, or an employee buyout, those are 2 other options. A key employee might want to buy you out entirely, and it's a good cultural transition for the company. You could also do the merger. Sometimes folks find that it's just easier to ride their contracts out based on how much life they have left and how much more time they want to stay in. That is an exit. Sometimes it's not the most profitable because they're not actually leveraging the asset, but they're taking a salary and they're taking distributions from the company for a certain amount of years. So it's really important to understand the price you want, what you're getting out of the company now versus what you can get in the marketplace. And sometimes, private equity can come in and buy out part of it. An investor can come in and buy out part of it. So there are a lot of different ways to exit. Knowing your contracts, understanding who you could sell to, who you could transition the company to, that is critical. And it usually will narrow down to, here are the top 2 or 3 things that I could do, and then let's go through and map out what's going to be the most profitable for me and what's going to be best for the company. I like to say there are 5 P's to exiting. There are 5 P's for pretty much everything, right? So why not exiting a government contracting business? Number 1 is planning. Number 2 is professionals. Number 3 is pricing. Number 4 is people. And number 5 is preparing for a marathon. Number 1 is planning. The first one I think I mentioned is you can never plan early enough. So even if you started your business last year or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, you should start planning now for the exit that you would ideally like to have, or the price you'd like to exit at. Things change, we all know that, but planning often and planning ahead of time is really important. And I usually recommend these folks do their annual strategic planning session, have kind of that exit planning internally for yourself or for a group of key employees as a part of that strategy. You understand where you are and how you're tracking against that final exit plan. Number 2 is professionals. I mentioned if you having a heart issue, you go to heart surgeon, you don't go to your general practitioner usually. It's understanding, and Angel mentioned this too, finding professionals that you trust, you understand what you're getting charged, and they're going to do a good job. So really investing in the right professionals is kind of that second P. 3 is pricing, and we've talked a little bit about this, but knowing what price you want, understanding how to calculate that price in the marketplace, looking at your EBITDA number, tracking that on a consistent basis, and then also really understanding what multiple you might fall into and getting feedback on that. So you can kind of ballpark where you are and then where you want to go. So really understand the price, and then talking to your wealth advisor, understanding what you need to continue after you sell that business. 4 is people, and this is one that's usually the most difficult for a lot of small business owners, because especially in the services space, in the government contracting services space, you're not built on a product, you're built on, those people that you have, those team members you have that are working with the government day in and day out, and those relationships are so critical. So when someone wants to sell, oftentimes the hardest conversation to have is with their team as they're getting ready to exit. Something to think about: key employees that would stay around with the company. Sometimes there are opportunities for small equity stakes or profit sharing for those key employees, because that's going to be pretty critical to someone taking over the business. They're going to want to know, to Angel's point, someone who has kind of read-in on recompetes that are coming in that are going to help carry the water with the transition. So really, thinking about how you message it to your team, but then also those key team members that you want to keep on, and you can talk to the seller about that. So people are really important as a part of this transition. And then finally, preparing for a marathon. And I think Lloyd and Angel talked to this a lot. It's not an easy thing. Exiting, it can take a year, it can take 2 years, it can take 3 years. Doing the planning appropriately ahead of time allows you to know when you go to market, you're ready. There are going to be no surprises. And I feel like, sellers can kind of hide things and sell, and you do want to get the highest price, but at the end of the day, all this data is publicly available on the contract. So it's important to also be pretty transparent, and just plan for getting the highest price, plan for trying to win what you can win, but understand that you might, go through a deal or two before it's the winner, and due diligence is going to take a while. So making sure you're organized with your documents, making sure you're ready to go, and just know that it's not going to be something that happens in a few months, that it is going to be more of a marathon, which is why you need to start preparing for it. And back to that planning, step one, just start planning for it ahead of time. So that's just kind of a summary of some pointers to think about as you exit, and you contemplate those different structures we discussed and lessons learned.
Okay, thank you, Erin. And
We're getting to the point where we're running out of time, and I really appreciate the patience of the folks that have hung with us. Just two things as we close. I got one last question, and it'll be posted on the website when I get the answer, because I'm sure it's a detailed answer that Erin would have to give us. But our next event is on the 26th of February in Houston, Texas, an all-day summit that will feature 12 federal agencies and 4 industry partners in Houston, Texas. And the next webinar is the 10th of March from 1 to 2. And it's going to be the one that we had to postpone, which is going to talk about sustaining your business to grow and scale. And again, I want to thank everybody that joined us, and for those people that stayed with us. And we'll get the last question I'll get with Ms. Andrews, and we'll make sure that's posted on our website. Thank you.